Gene Hackman always knew he was out of step with the Hollywood scene. From the moment he stepped into that realm, years before his name would be etched into pop culture, he sensed there was something beneath the dazzle, a web of hidden forces that quietly shaped destinies. Even when the cameras flashed in his favor and the limousines carried him from one premiere to the next, that nagging sense of unease persisted. Indeed, many saw him as the gruff, no-nonsense actor, an earnest craftsman more attached to creating memorable roles than mingling at star-studded soirees. But few realized just how deep his reservations ran. What gnawed at him was not a fleeting annoyance about inflated egos or shallow gossip. It was a growing awareness that unseen hand guided fortunes in Hollywood. Over the decades, he collected a patchwork of strange anecdotes, cryptic phone calls, scribbled notes in the margins of scripts, and confessions whispered by industry insiders who assumed he'd never betray their secrets. As he aged, the weight of all he had witnessed became almost unbearable. Whereas some actors contented themselves with glamorous retirements or philanthropic endeavors, Hackman remained haunted by the knowledge that the very system he'd prospered in was built on quicksand, where exploitation, power plays, and payoffs happened behind the bright glare of Klieg lights. Late in life, with a sense that time was running out, he began confiding in close friends, leaving cryptic messages in diaries, and even making secret audio recordings. Clint Eastwood was a name that loomed large in Hackman's personal narrative. Unforgiven, the Western that bound their fates on screen had also inflicted a peculiar wound in their off-screen relationship. To the public, they were two respected legends working together. Behind closed doors, tensions simmered. Hackman felt Eastwood's directorial style was too calculated. Every shot, every pause, every reaction precisely dictated, with little space for an actor's own creative spark. Some found Eastwood's technique brilliant, but Hackman perceived it as rigid and cold. A close friend once reported Hackman saying privately, he'd rather align the perfect shadow in the frame than let a character breathe on its own. But Hackman's grievances ran beyond mere creative clashes. Rumors began surfacing that Eastwood's influence extended well outside the director's chair. Certain young filmmakers who once spoke openly about creative freedom found themselves abruptly shut out of opportunities. Projects that had been greenlit were inexplicably canceled. Scripts vanished from agent offices. Producers refused to return calls. In hushed tones, Hackman told trusted confidants that he believed Eastwood harbored an iron-fisted control over the industry, a man so emblematic of Hollywood's rugged independence that few dared question him. As time wore on, Hackman grew increasingly uneasy. The robust cowboy persona Eastwood projected in interviews and public appearances made it all too easy for people to dismiss any accusations as outlandish. Eastwood had earned the public's trust through decades of iconic roles and critical acclaim. To suggest he was involved in power plays and stealthy career sabotage seemed unthinkable, almost insulting. And yet Hackman suspected that the biggest illusions in Hollywood were not on the screen, but rather in the boardrooms and behind the curtains where deals were struck at the expense of artistic dreams. In parallel to the Eastwood puzzle, there stood Tom Cruise. If Eastwood represented a kind of old-guard authority in the industry, Cruise was a superstar of a different generation, blazing trails and box office hits and championing Scientology with fervor. Hackman observed him from a distance, refusing even to consider projects that featured Cruise's name. When pressed, Hackman would dismiss the younger actor as Hollywood's most dangerous preacher in disguise. The issue was not simply that Cruise advocated a peculiar set of beliefs. Hackman feared the intangible network behind him. Privately, Hackman likened Scientology to a well-oiled intelligence operation, collecting personal secrets of its members, establishing hierarchical loyalties, and positioning powerful figures in entertainment to ensure the church's lasting influence. On more than one occasion, Hackman spoke in a near whisper about how the entire enterprise was a perfect synergy between spiritual facade and corporate-like control. As Hackman once told a friend, "You don't realize what real fear is until you get calls telling you to watch your step from people who never say their names." Though Hackman never publicly criticized Cruise outright, he hinted that the younger actor functioned as a frontline operative. Cruise was the church's shining example, a global icon whose loyalty encouraged others to follow suit. Those who challenged Scientology or questioned its practices risked professional fallout, whether it was a project unceremoniously shut down or a star suddenly losing major studio support. To Hackman's mind, the crucial problem was the melding of spiritual doctrine with Hollywood's star-making machine. creating an environment in which quiet intimidation felt almost casual. In one of his last recorded conversations, later discovered in partial transcripts, Hackman alluded to phone calls that would arrive late at night, the caller never identifying themselves, but always delivering the same chilling reminder. Hollywood listens to every word. After months of such calls, Hackman withdrew further from the industry spotlight, convinced these warnings were rooted in that vast, hidden framework that Cruise was emblematic of. At some point, it became more comfortable to vanish from public life than to keep playing a game in which the stakes for speaking one's mind might be professional destruction, or worse. Warren Beatty, in stark contrast to both Eastwood and Cruise, was once a friend Hackman admired. Known for his suave confidence in celebrated roles, Beatty was, for a brief time, Hackman's sounding board in a cutthroat world that devoured genuine relationships. They appeared to complement each other. Hackman was the no-frills actor with an intensity on camera that critics loved. Beatty, the charming sensation who could navigate Hollywood's social labyrinth with effortless poise. But an overheard exchange at a high-profile awards ceremony revealed a dimension of Beatty that Hackman found repugnant. Tucked away behind a heavy curtain, Beatty stood with two men in black suits, discussing a delicate matter involving a recently surfaced scandal. Hackman caught just enough detail to understand that someone was accusing a prominent star of misconduct during a private audition. Rather than express shock or even moral outrage, Beatty simply offered to deal with it quietly. To Hackman's ears, that phrase carried chilling weight. In a world already humming with payoffs and hush deals, Beatty was not just an actor or director. He was a facilitator of subterfuge. After that night, Hackman's faith in Beatty dissolved. He could no longer see him as a friend who just happened to be savvy. He now regarded him as a cunning orchestrator in a dark ecosystem of cover-ups. Eventually, Hackman compiled a private list of names rumored to have used Beatty's backroom connections to ward off scandal. While the exact entries on that list remained secret, second-hand accounts suggested it was alarmingly extensive. Major film directors, producers, influential actors, and even a couple of political figures. Through carefully engineered settlements and non-disclosure agreements, reputations were preserved. Meanwhile, potential victims or witnesses faded into the backdrop, their stories forever muted. Over time, Hackman's notes came to reference Beatty in almost ominous terms. According to one of the marginal scribbles discovered among Hackman's papers, Warren's brilliance lies in never being the one who delivers the threats. He's the handshake and the smile that makes the threats disappear. This transformation of a once respected ally into a symbol of Hollywood's moral bankruptcy weighed on Hackman, sharpening the edges of his disillusionment even further. As the pages of Hackman's diaries reveal, he never intended to play the heroic whistleblower. In his mind, the system was so vast and deeply rooted that a lone voice could do little. He did not relish conflict. Rather, he felt morally cornered. The real tragedies weren't just the hush-money deals or the overshadowed allegations of misconduct. It was the gnawing truth that so many individuals in Hollywood had quietly signed off on these distortions for decades. Reputation, publicity, and box office performance mattered more than moral accountability. From the vantage point of his later years, Hackman saw that this acceptance of complicity stemmed from the earliest foundations of Hollywood's star-making apparatus. No star, no producer, no director, he realized, was immune to the gravitational pull of the machine. Eastwood's controlling influence, Cruise's religiously charged domain, Beatty's hush broker tactics, all these were cogs in a larger mechanism that demanded blind loyalty. Brando's thwarted memoir, the rumored Shadow Advisory Board, the Faceless Fixer, each was another domino in a labyrinth that thrived on illusions and tested the moral fiber of everyone who dared to dream in the City of Angels. Increasingly reclusive, Hackman spent his final months revisiting old mementos, pictures from sets where he once felt camaraderie, documents from a career that spanned some of the most influential films in American cinema. In quiet reflection, he recognized he was not innocent in the system he despised. After all, he had remained silent while collecting paychecks and receiving awards. He had occasionally let questionable episodes slip by without protest, rationalizing it as not my fight. Nonetheless, the older he got, the more he resolved to leave behind some record, some testament that, despite Hollywood's outward glamour, a hidden web of power and corruption guided countless behind-the-scenes decisions. It might not spark a revolution, but at least it would exist. During one of his final interviews done under the radar with an aspiring journalist who adored his work in The French Connection, Hackman was subdued and introspective. Asked about his proudest moments, he dodged the typical answers about Oscar wins or iconic roles. Instead, he spoke, in vague but powerful terms, about how the greatest battles an actor might face aren't on the screen, but in the boardrooms, in secret gatherings. He said the real challenge was maintaining a sense of humanity in an environment obsessed with optics and leverage. He offered a cryptic aside. We have come to believe that stories belong to the screen, that they begin and end with the last reel. The real story is the one that never gets told, how success is built on hushes and illusions. The journalist tried pressing for details, but Hackman abruptly retreated, apologizing. If you knew what I know, he said quietly, I'm not sure you'd want to stay in this business. Those words encapsulated the heartbreak of a performer who had built an extraordinary legacy under a system that, to him, was fundamentally broken. In subsequent days, Hackman permitted the journalist only a single follow-up. Unnamed sources say Hackman revealed bits of these silent battles, star after star whose real struggles were whitewashed, deals that guaranteed million-dollar paychecks at the cost of personal integrity, and hush arrangements that left victims with no recourse. The interview never saw full publication. Official statements claimed editorial decisions were responsible, but rumor held that unseen forces had again intervened. In the days immediately following Hackman's death, the break-in at his home was performed so skillfully that the police found no definitive clues to identify a culprit. Yet the items missing were alarmingly specific. Audio tapes, notebooks containing references to Eastwood, Cruise, Beatty, Brando, and the notorious Fixer. Photographs in which Hackman had scribbled observations on the back were also gone. Family members inspected the rest of the property, noticing that everything else of value, like jewelry, electronics, expensive film memorabilia, remained untouched. Only upon reflection did the magnitude of this theft become apparent. It was as though the intruders were scouring every trace of Hackman's deeper suspicions, intent on leaving no evidence behind. The biggest question was who orchestrated it. Some whispered it was the Hollywood machine at large, converging to shield its top players. Others believed a single influential figure, someone Hackman had unwittingly aggravated, had mobilized private forces to sanitize the late actor's estate. Still, others teased the possibility that Scientology's network or the rumored advisory board might have gotten involved. None of it could be confirmed, and no official investigation led to any meaningful progress. Close friends and relatives recounted Hackman's final weeks with sorrow. They recalled a man who, for all his gloom, still clung to a hope that the truth might outlive him. He had entrusted fragments of his story to several individuals, urging them to protect that knowledge in case anything ever happened to him. Although the majority of tangible evidence vanished from his safe, rumors say that a few pieces of crucial intel, copies of diaries, transcripts of taped conversations, were slipped into locked safety deposit boxes or handed to confidants outside Los Angeles. Whether those documents will ever see daylight is anyone's guess. As the months rolled on, an eerie hush fell over the industry whenever Hackman's name arose in private gatherings. The press eulogized him as an acting virtuoso, praising his versatility and awarding him posthumous accolades. Fawning tributes described him as an intense, dedicated professional who never courted controversy. But behind the scenes, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through certain quarters. With Hackman gone, one of the last guardians of so many hidden stories was no longer able to spill them. Yet a handful of inquisitive minds, young directors, journalists, and film historians, took an interest in the more speculative aspects of Hackman's legacy. They pieced together testimonies from bartenders, retired producers, costume assistants, and anyone else who had encountered the veteran actor in his twilight years. Thread by thread, they found just enough consistency to keep Hackman's darker confessions from fading into the realm of mere conspiracy. Although they had no definitive proof, they uncovered repeated references to clandestine parties, hush payments, and a behind-the-scenes power dynamic that spanned from the offices of major studios to the boardrooms of financial giants who funded Hollywood's expansions. Hackman's story, then, became a kind of legend whispered among those who dared to peel back the layers. Some film students wrote theses on the hidden hierarchies of Hollywood, using the scraps of Hackman's perspective as a launching point. Occasional online forums circulated persistent rumors that one day the real Hackman files would emerge, perhaps uncovered in an archive or left as a puzzle for future generations to decipher. Skeptics derided these claims as gullible nonsense, arguing that there was no way the industry industry's most powerful figures would collectively conspire for so long without substantial leaks. Believers countered that the entire history of Hollywood was peppered with instances of cunning manipulation. Why would this be any different? Ultimately, Gene Hackman's culminating stance was not that of a conventional hero. He was an observer, a man whose journey spanned decades and who saw more than he ever wanted to. While he made a career out of portraying complex roles on film, his true complexity lay in choosing how to live in a system he found morally compromised. Over the years, he made enough to live comfortably. He performed in classics that graced countless cinema halls, and he garnered the admiration of peers and fans alike. But that did not erase the disquiet he carried, the pang of regret that he hadn't come forward sooner and more forcefully. In his final notes, rumored to have been written in a shaky hand, Hackman expressed sorrow for not being braver. He admitted that he stayed silent at critical moments, letting illusions remain unchallenged, partly out of fear and partly out of practicality. "I let them keep spinning the story," he reportedly wrote, "because I wasn't prepared to shoulder the consequences." He recognized that the price for outright confrontation in Hollywood could be devastating. Blacklisting, character assassination, or even vague threats against one's safety. For Hackman, the very environment that had propelled him to stardom was also a minefield. Yet he also imparted a tiny spark of hope in those scribbles. He suggested that while the system could manipulate the present, it could not hold the truth back forever. Future generations, with new media platforms and changing social attitudes, might start asking the questions he had long been afraid to. Indeed, the slow burn of social transformations, where victims at last find their voice and powerful figures are sometimes toppled, offered a faint glimmer of optimism. As the industry moved on, glitzy premieres and award shows continued unabated. Clint Eastwood directed more films, mostly beloved by fans and critics. Tom Cruise appeared in blockbusters that raked in staggering profits worldwide. Warren Beatty occasionally ventured back into the spotlight to promote new ventures or re-releases of his classics. Marlon Brando's legend remained unassailable in cinematic retrospectives. All seemed business as usual, the open secrets never breaking beyond subdued murmurs or half-baked online rumors. Yet in the quieter corners of Hollywood, especially among those who had heard Hackman's stories firsthand, there was a sense that a crucial curtain had been lifted, at least for a moment. What might have happened if Hackman had lived another decade and found a platform to air his revelations is an open question. Some suspect the same powers that moved to wipe clean his safe after his death would have intervened much sooner. Others argue that his advanced age made him a less threatening figure. He was no longer a major box office draw or a star who commanded daily headlines. Nonetheless, the mere possibility that Hackman could have arranged some grand exposé was enough to rattle a host of influential individuals. Perhaps that is why, in the final tally, the tapes and diaries needed to be removed from circulation without delay. In the end, Hackman's legacy resides both in the films he left behind and in the intangible echo of his attempts to reveal the unvarnished reality he had witnessed. For many, he is still best remembered as the stalwart actor who anchored classics like The French Connection and Unforgiven, while for others, the mention of his name conjures cryptic rumors of the darkest Hollywood truths. Neither perspective is entirely wrong. Both are part of a bigger tapestry that Hackman himself once described as the difference between the glitter we see from afar and the tarnish that creeps up close. And so the world goes on, celebrating icons and legends, showering them with accolades and newspaper headlines. The gossip columns churn out endless stories, some sensationalized, some trivially entertaining. Yet underneath it all, the seeds planted by Gene Hackman's private observations still lurk in the background, ready to sprout whenever someone dares to water them with curiosity. Perhaps that, in the end, was Hackman's ultimate parting gift. A subtle invitation to look beyond the spotlight, to glimpse the machinery that shapes stars into legends and discards those who refuse to comply. In a city constructed on dreams and illusions, sometimes the only real spark of authenticity is the whisper reminding us that something else is going on behind the gilded sets. Even after his departure, the question remains. If an actor as respected and grounded as Gene Hackman believed there was a hidden structure that controlled the fates of so many, how can the rest of the world continue to dismiss the possibility? Perhaps it is simpler and more comforting to cling to the official narrative, that Hollywood, while flawed, is not as conspiratorial as the rumors say. Yet when the illusions melt away, the only real certainty is this. Hackman gathered what he did, wrote it down in diaries, recorded it on tapes, and tried in his own quiet way to pass it on.